All right, we are here at the European Parliament in Brussels, where the UNPO just organized a conference on the situation in Pakistan in terms of human rights, especially for minorities, for some of the areas that are maybe well less known, such as Gilgit-Baltistan or Balochistan, parts of Sindh, but also in relation with the new development program that the Pakistani government is developing together with the Chinese investment, the CPEC. So we're happy to have 4 guests to discover more about that and to talk about the situation in Pakistan today. Let me start maybe with Rashed Rahman. Rashed, you're the editor of Pakistan's Daily Times.
I was.
You were.
Yes.
So you have a background in journalism and also in trying to understand what is going on in your country, in Pakistan. If we say human rights are under pressure in Pakistan, would you say they're in a better shape today, or are they getting under more heavy pressure?
I think the latter, because what is happening is that we have a nationalist insurgency going on in one province, that is Balochistan. We have the fallout of terrorism and the Afghan war in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, another province, and to some extent Balochistan and the rest of the country also. And then we have increasing discontent, because although we've been fighting for democracy almost 70 years since Pakistan was created, with interruptions by military rule every now and again, I think there is a lot of discontentment with democracy as it functions in Pakistan today. And therefore, the question of rights, and including human rights, is very much center stage in people's minds now. And I think the situation, far from improving, seems to be getting worse, because the authorities want to settle this issue through repression, and that is, in my view, a non-starter.
But when we think about human rights in Pakistan, we often see from Europe or the rest of the world the conflict surrounding extremism, militant groups pushing for a very strict Islam or a political Islam. Today we're looking at other issues, like, for instance, you mentioned nationalist rebellion in Balochistan. How important are those issues in the state of Pakistan and in relation with human rights?
Well, I think first, terrorism. As you know, we have been involved with Afghanistan in one way or the other for more than 4 decades. And the inevitable chickens have come home to roost by now, because just as Afghanistan has spawned terrorist groups and movements throughout the region and arguably the world, there's also been the same kind of fallout in Pakistan. So we now have a homegrown Taliban.
Yeah.
So coping with that and with its effects is one aspect. The security required to try and keep Pakistan safe from such terrorist attacks and incidents involves areas which are grey, because they involve security measures which may militate against the rights of citizens and against their human rights. And as far as the other problems are concerned, like the nationalist insurgency, similar remarks apply, because once you apply a very stringent security regime, inevitably the things that suffer are critics, dissidents, and a critique of the general situation. And such people then become subject to repression, which is not a very happy situation.
I talked to people from the government of Balochistan last week, and they adamantly said that there is no nationalist rebellion at this moment. There's criminal elements that try to upset the country. What would you answer to that?
I've read the reports. I know these people who came as a delegation for the Balochistan government. They are trying to present a picture here in Brussels of being in the best of all possible worlds. But I'm sorry to say that doesn't fit the ground realities. There is an insurgency. Yes, it has suffered setbacks and therefore is at a lower level perhaps than it was when it began, or when it reached its peak rather. But by no means is it over, by no means is it eliminated, and by no means are these criminal elements. It's a political movement, and it's a political insurgency imbued with nationalist aspirations, because there's a whole history in Balochistan. This is the fifth rebellion since Pakistan came into being. That means there's been a revolt in every generation since 1947. That implies that there is something permanently wrong, and which is being attempted to be resolved through force and repression again and again, ignoring Einstein's advice that, if you do the same thing, you're not going to get different results. But has that truth or that wisdom penetrated the authorities' mind? No, it doesn't look like.
Would you say that the rebellion has a legitimate cause to put on the table? Are the demands legitimate?
Yes, I think there is a history here. Briefly, Balochistan wanted to be treated differently when Pakistan was created. It sought the status of a princely state, which had, treaty relations with the British Crown. And yet, when Pakistan came into being, under the pressure of the circumstances of that time, it was forcibly annexed. That grievance has led to a series of other grievances over natural resources, over representation, over finding a voice in the system. It is a very small population in a very large area, largely tribal and nomadic. So its weight in the political debate, shall we say, or its voice in the political system is weak and has been relatively ignored. So there's a set of grievances. Not all of them are resolvable outside the constitution and four corners of the law as it exists. Separatism, yes, cannot be within that. But if you were to start a process of dialogue within what is acceptable, and maybe meet them halfway, you might be able to nudge them halfway. But if you continue to use a policy of force and repression, then there's no dialogue, there's no question of any resolution. The grievances will only mount.
And maybe Mr. Rahman, you can comment on that, because the whole issue of religious minorities or ethnic minorities has been quite important in Pakistan, say the past 10 years and even before. Is it something that is discussed, debated in the broader public in Pakistan, or is it something that is relegated to advocates for minority rights or for human rights lawyers?
No, I think there is a debate in the public, certainly in the media. There is reportage, there is comment, and a lot of concern. The problem of minorities in Pakistan, ironically, arose in a new state which was based on the premise of autonomy for a large minority in undivided India, Muslims.
Yeah.
But when it came into existence, then this whole contention about the nature of the state began. And I think the clerics won out when they pushed Pakistan in the direction of declaring itself an Islamic state. The moment it did that, the position of religious minorities, and arguably some ethnic minorities also, became worse. Because if you have a Sunni-dominated Islamic state of Pakistan, then all the rest are on the margins or out of the picture altogether. So their rights and their status in the new state became secondary.
Yeah. But that is a de facto situation.
That's the de facto.
The constitution doesn't talk about an
the
Islamic state.
The constitution, in fact, lays down that no segregation on the basis of religion, caste, creed, etc. can be carried out. But that is in theory, that's on paper. In reality, what is going on is that particularly in the last 4 decades or so, when Pakistan became involved in Afghanistan, and that gave rise to these extremist religious parties, groups, and some of them even terrorists, that you've had a climate in Pakistan in which the minorities have been under attack. And it's not just non-Muslim minorities like Christians, Hindus, Sikhs, Ahmadis who've been declared non-Muslims by Pakistan. It is also Shias, who are about 20% of the population of Pakistan, are a sect or faction inside Islam. and yet they are also under attack because the Sunni majority extremist view regards them as outside the pale of Islam.
And within the Sunni majority, you have the conflict between Deobandi and Barelvi, and what is...
Yes, because Barelvi is much more rooted in the history and traditions of the subcontinent, and it takes into its fold Sufi thought and, saints, Sufi saints, and so on and so forth.
So they have been demonstrating and defending terrorist groups or militants that, like the militant that killed the governor of Punjab, was defended even by some Barelvi organization.
Now, again, the tradition is something else, and what it has evolved into, or factions that have emerged out of the Barelvi school of thought, is something else. There are extremists within them too now, given this climate that I spoke of. Of course, the Deobandis are at odds with the Barelvis, but there are also extremists now within the Barelvis. One very good example you've quoted, it's a Barelvi who killed Salman Taseer and has been made into a Sufi hero, a shrine has been erected in his memory and so on and so forth. So it's very complex and layered, the whole situation. But if we were to sum it up, a majoritarian Sunni Islam, outside of whose pale are not only religious minorities but other sects, and then within those sects also there is now extremism. So it's a very, very complicated picture.
In much of what is being said up to now, there's talk about oppression by the Pakistani state of ethnic minorities, of whole provinces or regions. And basically, implicitly, to me, it sounds very often as saying it is the Punjabis that are controlling the Pakistani state and are actually exploiting the resources of the rest. You are from Punjab. How does that resonate with you?
I think we have to understand that the post-colonial state called Pakistan that emerged retained all the features and powerful institutions of the colonial state. For instance, the military and the bureaucracy, the steel frame of the empire was intact and came to dominate Pakistan. And since a vast majority of those institutions and their members were drawn from Punjab, it is the Punjabi elite which essentially was in control of Pakistan as a post-colonial state. As a result, there's been an internal colonialism at work in the post-colonial state of Pakistan. That's why the Bengalis eventually left. They were the majority, by the way. A majority seceding from the minority. And that is why you have all the complaints, grievances and issues of other now ethnic groups within remaining Pakistan, Sindh, Balochistan, to some extent the Pashtuns. There is an internal colonial structure inherited from the colonial state, perpetuated by the post-colonial state and its powerful institutions inherited from the past.
Now, one issue that Pakistan has been struggling with is exactly national unity, because it's a composite nation in a sense from the beginning. Would you feel that, because some people argue that the CPEC, the big project that the national government is developing together with the Chinese, that CPEC, as it runs from the far north down to the deep south, will be an integrating factor, will be an infrastructure project that is trying to bring the outlying areas and economies into the national fold? Or will it even make the differences and the divides bigger?
If there is that hope, then I think it is an illusion, because factually what CPEC is doing is dividing people even more. Contention over the project, resources, route, fears about demographic change and, ethnic nationalities being reduced to minorities in their own provinces. All these are questions that are floating about. So there's more division, not less. And let me add, the fundamental flaw in the way the new state was constructed was not to recognize that this is not a homogeneous nation state, it is a multinational state. Had that been recognized from the beginning and the autonomy of the constituent units recognized and respected, perhaps there would have been an integration process at work by now. But instead, when you denied this existence of the various nationalities in Pakistan and wanted to impose a unitary, highly centralized state, not even a federal structure, then you got all these problems. You laid the foundations for all these problems. Those foundations are now big buildings. They can't be wished away, and no CPEC is going to change that, because CPEC itself is not including people in the manner in which they could perhaps be brought together. No. On the contrary.
I would like to ask about the larger impact, because one of the things that CPEC brings with it, apart from large infrastructure work and import not just of Chinese capital but sometimes of Chinese workers, is also the demand for more security. Because all this construction of roads and of energy dams and what have you, the port itself in Gwadar, demands a secure environment.
Yeah.
How will that play out in Pakistan? Will it could go different ways. It could develop into the notion that we need to include everybody in a better way, so that insecurity and violence is pushed out of our society, or it could be a military solution that maybe not only is being provided by the Pakistani military, but even with support from China. I don't know if you have any projection of where that is going.
Yeah, I think people in Pakistan who are aware of the ground realities have been arguing from day one, since CPEC was announced, that this project needs peace and tranquility, particularly in the regions through which it is scheduled to pass. If you have insurgencies, and if you have more than 6,000 kilometers of corridor to guard, and you are raising a new force for that, which is estimated to be anywhere between 15 and 20,000 men, and the taxpayer is going to pay for it, how can 15 to 20,000 men even manage a corridor of over 6,000 kilometers? How can they secure it? They can secure it in bits and pieces, but not the whole length. And even in Balochistan, where there's a nationalist insurgency, the length of the corridor is so great that even 10 times this number couldn't guard it. So the logic of engaging those who are opposing CPEC and are at odds with the government is unassailable. And yet, in a very strange and ironic way, the government is unable to see beyond its nose. It thinks it can, through military force, keep these forces at bay. But, I mean, even in this very small, relatively nationalist insurgency, infrastructure is being hit. Whether it's rail, whether it's electricity, whether it's gas pipelines, every so often there's an explosion, something blows up. Okay, you repair it, but the uncertainty is there. Can you imagine what a corridor of this length and this importance may suffer as a result of not having the political wisdom to include people in these new developments, bring peace and tranquility, and allow it to proceed?
Situation in Pakistan, especially when looked upon from the perspective of ethnic, national or cultural minorities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.